Glad you could join us again, everyone. I'm Adeshawa Josh, and this is Africa Matters. This week, we look at how people are coping with skyrocketing cost of living across Africa. We'll bring you reports from Ghana and Cameroon, and then head to Zimbabwe, where the government has introduced digital tokens in an attempt to slow hyperinflation and reduce its reliance on the US dollar. Much like the rest of the world, many African countries are grappling with a dramatic rise in the price of food, fuel, housing, and other basic goods. Last year, sub-Saharan Africa saw a record-high inflation of more than 12%, driven by the soaring global cost of grains and fuel, according to the International Monetary Fund. But as inflation rates begin to ease, the purchasing power of many African households has been eroded by the high cost of food imports and low wages. Let's take a look at how the continent is coping. The latest IMF report shows that more than half of African countries saw double-digit inflation for the first time in decades, and that made daily life unaffordable for most people. Tighter global monetary policies have raised borrowing costs for most African countries, both on domestic and international markets. The US dollar-pegged exchange rate reached a 20-year high last year, increasing the burden of public debt service payments. And between 2020 and 2022, the IMF provided more than $50 billion in loans, which is twice the amount disbursed in any 10-year period since the 1990s. But how does it impact people's daily lives? According to the latest data by Numbeo, a crowdsourced database of government data and user inputs, Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Ethiopia are the three most expensive African countries to live in, while Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia have the lowest cost of living on the continent. Senegal's cost of living index is the highest in Africa, with a family of four spending about $2,500 without rent every month. Now, Egypt is ranked the least expensive country in Africa. Still, according to Numbeo, the average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the capital Cairo is around $220. Now, let's hear more from Ali Kansachu. He is the CEO of Rich Management and SSA Geopolitical and Economic Analyst. He joins me from Nairobi. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, my question is, do you agree with that Numbeo, with the Numbeo data? Let's start with that.
It was very interesting because I think I do agree with it. I think what I've discovered is Francophone Africa is quite expensive, and that's a result of the structure of those economies. They tend to import a lot of food from abroad, for example. I was surprised by Egypt because Egypt has been under tremendous pressure. The currency has been the weakest currency on the continent. But I think what that's informing me is that there is a large element of subsidy in the Egyptian economy. However, the overall macro story is that inflation has really gone off the charts all over the continent and has put tremendous pressure on people's living standards.
So tell me, there is a connection between inflation and the cost of living, isn't there?
Absolutely. The inflation basically is the measure of the increase in prices, and therefore the correlation is very direct. Personally, I think some inflation numbers actually don't reflect the true increase in prices that we're seeing. I think they tend to undercook the number in many respects. So yes, a direct correlation between inflation and cost of living.
And going by the numbers that we have now, it does look like inflation is beginning to ease. Unfortunately, in most African countries, the price of things and the cost of living remains the same. How do you explain that?
So firstly, I would dispute that conclusion that inflation is coming down in most African countries. I was just looking at MTN's results, and they're in about 18 African countries, and they are saying the inflation rate increased by 850 basis points across the countries that they operate in. And then bear in mind, when people say inflation is decreasing, they mean it's a lower number than the previous number, but the prices are still going higher. So if inflation comes from 6% to 5.6, it means prices are increasing at 5.6%. They're not increasing at 6%. So what we are seeing here is a dramatic slide in living standards, because bear in mind that most Africans spend the greatest amount of money on food, and food prices have, although they've sort of trended lower a little bit in the last 12 months, they are considerably higher than they've been previously in the last 2 decades. And that's taking up a lot of the spending that the average African has. It's a very tough situation, I'm afraid, for the average person.
So there is a growing trend of removing the US dollar from international trade with the hopes that, countries, a lot of countries in West Africa pegged to this exchange rate would have some kind of relief. Is this the way to go? And also answer us, what is the best way out of this cost of living crisis that we are in Africa?
So your first question about the dollar is an important one. And bear in mind also that the Francophone countries have a similar problem with the euro, that they are very beholden to these two currencies. We're seeing a significant trend develop. This was driven by the Ukraine war, by the freezing of Russia's $300 billion of reserves held in dollars in the American banking system. And that's driven this idea that we should be looking for optionality, and we should be looking for other options vis-a-vis the dollar and the euro. And that's pushing this drive for the BRICS currency. It's pushing for increased trade in local currency. I think this trend is going to gain momentum, but we're not at a decapitation moment for the dollar or the euro. It's going to take a decade or more. But I think it's important that we seek more sovereignty over our own trading and borrowing going forward. With respect to the cost of living, how do we bring that down? I think governments have got to look at simple things. The biggest component in the cost of living basket is food. So we've got to look at increasing food production across the continent, and making more countries self-sufficient when it comes to food. I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is we've got to get more value for our exports. We've got to look at going up the value chain and basically increasing the income of African countries. I think those are the two key elements that can make a difference.
Wow, let's grow our own food. Thank you so much. Ali Kansachu, the CEO of Rich Management and SSA geopolitical and economic analyst, for speaking to Africa Matters. Thank you. Thank you. Even though Ghana is one of the less expensive countries to live on the continent, the West African nation is facing a dire economic crisis. With a skyrocketing inflation of more than 50% as of March, the cedi continues to depreciate against major foreign currencies. The government says it hopes to fix the problem with a bailout deal from the International Monetary Fund this year, but a decision to increase taxes is already taking a toll on low-income earners and small businesses. Isaac Kaleja reports from Accra.
Victoria Agbai runs this skincare product business in the Ghanaian capital, Accra. This business provides the only disposable income she has for personal and family upkeep. In 2019, when Agbai started, it was all joy. At the time, she thought this was the answer to having a regular flow of income. But nowadays, she struggles to make ends meet. It has been tough coping with soaring inflation, which not only gnaws away at her income, but also her production levels.
Almost all the raw materials have doubled or tripled or quadrupled, and there have been a lot of supply chain disruptions. So getting access to some of the few components that are imported, like the fragrance oils or the packaging materials, it's really difficult. So as an entrepreneur, you have to surround yourself with positive people. There are days when, honestly, I feel like giving up.
Dr. Joseph Obin runs a larger business than Agbai's, situated away from Accra's central business district. His electrical product business employs hundreds of people. Obin, who also leads the Union of Traders in Ghana, says Excessive taxes from the government have also made it tough sustaining businesses like his.
Our capitals are being depleted. The last couple of years have seen increment of taxes, and that we are being overburdened. And then the last quarter of 2022 also saw the depreciation of the Ghana cedis. That also depleted about 52% of our working capitals. This is the state of affairs. Inflation is over 50%.
Some businesses have closed because of high inflation. Prices of essential commodities are eating away at the incomes of ordinary people. Government was expecting to have secured a $3 billion bailout from the IMF by now, but restructuring unsustainable debts hasn't gone well so far. Securing assurances from creditors like China would be key. But analysts say the government must also cut down on public spending, which is estimated to be over $11.6 billion. That's 27.4% of the country's GDP, a trend that worries some experts.
The first thing that you should do is to cut your own expenditure before you even started looking at debt restructuring. Because when you go to World Bank, IMF, and you're looking, they will look at it. All these things are factors delaying it all, but they don't want to accept it. They think that you want to keep your old style of business, but you don't want to sacrifice.
The government doesn't seem sure of when things will get under control. Its best bet is the IMF deal. Etuahini believes that is a bad strategy when there are alternatives.
If remittances alone is bringing you well over 4 billion and you're just going to take a loan for 4 billion, what is it? If you structure your remittances very well, you can even do foreign bonds with those who pay you, and you get good money because they are remittances.
The government has promised to tackle the crisis, but there isn't any sign of when ordinary people would get the financial help they so desperately need. Isaac Kalaji, Africa Matters, Accra, Ghana.
And we head to Cameroon now, where, like much of the world, is also grappling with a cost of living crisis. But as Arison Tamfo reports from Tole, a village in the southwest of the country, some communities are feeling the pinch more than others.
80-year-old Ngumba George was born in Tole, a village that is home to a few thousand people in a remote part of southwestern Cameroon. He says he's never seen prices as high as this in his life, especially for rice, pepper, and bread. Everyone in Cameroon is suffering from the rising cost of living. But in this small village, miles away from high salaries in the country's cities, residents are barely surviving on 1 square meal a day.
People when they dey for town, they get their money.
Everything is now expensive. We have no money to buy. People are dying of hunger. Those who live in town have the money to feed themselves well. But us in the village, we don't feed well because things have become very expensive. A small cup of rice is now 200. You can't survive with your family. They can't feed to their satisfaction.
If you are having at least 5 children in the house, you cannot eat satisfactory because the 5 cups of rice, children will eat, and you, the mother, you will not know what to eat. So because of the increase of prices, we are suffering a lot. Children are growing pale. Parents are growing pale.
Some of the residents here work in nearby towns and cities during the week, while others rely on farming for their income. But they've been struggling to make ends meet. The recent spike in consumer prices, especially food, has hit villages like this one particularly hard.
In the markets, these costs have discouraged most customers from buying. Cameroon's government is blaming it all on global factors such as the impact of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, which is affecting supply chains. Official figures put the inflation rate at nearly 6%, But purchasing power for an estimated 20 million Cameroonians has dropped considerably over time.
The rate of inflation has skyrocketed across the nation. Unfortunately, it is some reports indicate that in some rural communities it has quadrupled or it has tripled, where basic commodities have witnessed 3 times the price that used to be. The rural areas are far off removed from the centers of those distribution centers, and so there is a higher and an added economic value added to the cost of distribution, which definitely and necessarily affects the price at which the goods and commodities are sold, are retailed.
The government maintains the country's economy is strong because of stable growth in exports. But such stability is not reflected in the standard of living of villagers. Ngumba wants the government to act fast to stabilize prices. Until then, his wives and 21 children will have to battle on in the struggle to survive high prices. Arison Tamfo, Africa Matters, Tole, Cameroon.
Well, it's no longer news that the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia war on Ukraine has left governments and economies around the world scrambling to recover. In Kenya, where the economy has suffered particularly badly, business owners have been forced to make changes to stay afloat. Yunus Emre has more.
Marley's shop in Nairobi makes chapati, a flatbread bought and consumed by almost everyone in Kenya. But the rising cost of ingredients has made it hard to turn a profit.
The price of commodities has been going up every day. I was buying cooking oil at $1.50. Right now it's at $3. I was buying maize flour at $1.40. Now it's at $2.20.
And the price of maize flour has more than doubled in the past 2 years. To cope with the inflation, Shamalla has been forced to change the way he operates.
I've tried rationing the portion of chapati or ugali, and still things are not adding up because of the high costs of living. With one bundle of wheat flour, I could make 25 chapatis, and now I'm making 35. The customers are complaining.
Right next door, the owner, Regina Ngina, explains that the situation is similar for groceries.
Times are very hard. Business has gone down. I used to buy even 2 sacks of potatoes per day. Oranges and tomatoes, I used to buy 2 crates. But now it has gone down and I am buying less.
Buying less produce means there's less produce to sell, and that means less profit. So Regina has to make some sacrifices.
Right now, I cannot eat in the morning. I drink tea without milk in the morning and skip lunch. I only have dinner so that I can save money. I am even having difficulty paying school fees for my kids.
While global prices for goods like wheat and oil have started to stabilize, small business owners in Kenya have yet to feel the effect. Many are now stuck trying to sell goods they bought at heavily inflated prices. Yunus Emre, Africa Matters.
We head to Zimbabwe now, where the government is trying to stabilize its currency by introducing digital money. The move is aimed at reducing reliance on the US dollar, which has replaced the worthless Zimbabwean dollar as the most widely used currency. The digital money is to be backed by the country's gold reserves, with the value determined by international gold prices.
For 5 years, 24-year-old Rudomreverwe survived by changing money in Harare, an illegal business that's now gradually sinking. She says moves like the introduction of digital money are likely to make it worse.
The business is suffering these days because of many factors. Exchange rates have gone down significantly, and it's no longer as viable as before.
And she is not alone in this predicament. In the past 15 years, currencies such as these have been introduced as measures to strengthen the Zimbabwean dollar without success. Now the central bank is pinning its hopes on digital currency, thinking it won't lose value owing to the gold reserves backing and harness inflation. Some analysts see it as a positive step.
Because the expectation is that their introduction should help to moderate the high levels of demand for the US dollar. You know, the economy has been dollarizing. We are now predominantly a dollarized economy.
But ordinary Zimbabweans are still cautious of the new currency and remain unconvinced.
I am yet to hear or read anything about the digital money, so I am still in the dark.
There is no confidence in the first place. They just need confidence. If they introduce many currencies, up to 20, if there is no confidence, it's just as good as the old currency.
After many unsuccessful attempts to normalize the financial sector, their fears are possibly justified. The new digital venture is the latest attempt at halting decades of economic decline. At one time, the Zimbabwean currency was one of the strongest in the world, and it remains the hope of many here that previous prosperous times will roll back. John Nyashanu, Africa Matters, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Nigeria is a diverse country with large populations of both Muslims and Christians. These two groups are sometimes divided by prejudice. But a Muslim chef set on tackling the issue is using her cooking skills to change narratives. Ramesa Choda reports.
Chef, entrepreneur, and content creator Sherifa Yunus Olakadana is making her mark in Nigeria with the mission of breaking stereotypes about Nigeria's Muslim women.
Women in hijab continue to get negative vibes from people. The people who don't wear hijab say, oh, this doesn't happen, but that is the problem. People who dress the way I'm dressed are looked down upon in Nigeria.
Nigeria is almost evenly divided between its largely Christian south and mainly Muslim north, where cultural norms often discourage women to get into business. Just like Olokodana, he's a Yoruba Muslim from the southwest. Despite being a cake and pastry chef for nearly 2 decades, she still faces prejudice.
Being a woman who dresses this way, I have to do 10 times the work of the average woman, because for people to even listen to me, I must have gotten to a certain stage. I have done this work consistently for over 10 years. I would say 13 years in the spice mix business and about 18 years in the cake and pastry business. And now that my brand is known, you can see how long it took. And major thing is how I am dressed.
Currently, she co-hosts a monthly online cooking show, teaching her followers how to make unique dishes with organic spices. Among the followers is a Christian social media influencer, Raya Ahan Mukhaye, who fully supports her.
I love the fact that she's a living example of what you can achieve from home and following your faith. You know, people look at us and they say we're on two extreme divides. She's a devoted Muslim, I'm a devoted Christian, and yet we're able to come together. Why? Even the Bible says, can two walk together except they agree? We agreed on one thing. We want better health for Nigeria, and we want women to actually be able to do what they want to do and to be successful in everything they do.
So far, the initiative has been awarded as one of the fastest growing small businesses in Nigeria. The Muslim chef is now working on promoting good relations with the Muslim community and tackling bias by changing hearts and minds. Rumeysa Chodar, Africa Matters.
This week, we explore Harar, an ancient city in eastern Ethiopia. It is considered the fourth holiest city of Islam, with nearly 100 mosques. Let's take a closer look. And that's our show this week. Kindly share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode, or ideas on what you would like us to cover on Twitter using the hashtag #AfricaMatters. Feel free to reach out to me at my personal handle at @AdeshowaJosh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters TRT World. Like, comment, and share. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you next week.